Usually when we talk about a painting selling at a high-end auction, it's treated as this very sterile transaction.
Right. A guy in a suit drops a wooden gavel, and that's it.
Exactly. A number is called out to a room full of billionaires, and a piece of canvas quietly changes hands.
Very formal, very quiet.
Yeah, but every so often, the number called out is just so staggering, so completely paradigm shifting that it forces the rest of us to stop and pay attention.
Oh, definitely.
Like, in 2014, a 1932 painting of a white flower went up for auction. Specifically, a piece called Jimson Weed, White Flower Number 1.
I remember this.
The final price was $44.4 million, which at the time was by far the highest price ever paid for a painting by a female artist.
It is just a breathtaking sum of money. I mean, a figure like that immediately makes you wonder about the hands that actually stretch that canvas.
Absolutely.
You start thinking about the person holding the brush and the life they had to live to create something that the world values that highly.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the life, the legacy, and the absolute iron will of the artist behind that $44 million flower, Georgia O'Keeffe.
It's going to be a good one.
We're pulling from some really extensive biographical and historical sources covering her entire 7-decade career. We want to figure out how a dairy farm girl from Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, became the fierce, undisputed mother of American modernism.
Yeah, and when you really dig into the source material, you realize her story isn't just an art history lesson. It is a masterclass in holding on to your own identity.
Right.
It's this lifelong, highly public struggle between an artist's original intent and a world that constantly, relentlessly tried to project its own meanings onto her work.
So to understand this towering icon of modern art, I think we first have to look at how remarkably close she came to never making art at all.
Oh, it's a miracle she ever picked up a brush again.
Seriously. So she was born in 1887. She's the second of 7 children on a Wisconsin dairy farm. And the sources show that by the age of 10, she had already decided she was going to be an artist.
Just knew it right away.
Yeah, but the universe just threw this seemingly endless series of life-threatening hurdles at her.
Right, the illnesses.
Yeah. She contracted typhoid fever, which, was a devastating illness in the early 1900s. It forced her to abandon her education for an entire year.
And then it just kept coming.
Right. Later, she catches the measles. And then in 1908, the bottom completely fell out. Her father went bankrupt in a severe financial crisis, and her mother contracted tuberculosis.
The sheer accumulation of adversity during those formative years is just profound.
It's a lot for anyone.
By 1908, O'Keeffe found herself entirely unable to finance her art studies at the Art Students League in New York. I mean, the money was simply gone.
Wow.
But, her withdrawal from the art world wasn't just financial. It was actually a fundamental crisis of faith in the very nature of the art she was being taught to make.
This detail from the sources is just mind-blowing to me. She actually quit painting for 4 entirely art-free years.
She just stopped.
Yeah, she claimed that just the smell of turpentine made her physically ill, so she completely pivoted.
She had to pay the bills somehow.
Right, so she takes jobs as a commercial artist in Chicago, drawing, lace and embroidery for advertisements, and later she takes jobs as an art teacher, just to survive.
It's wild to think about.
It feels akin to a brilliant classical musician abandoning their instrument because they suddenly despise reading sheet music.
It's a great way to put it.
But, okay, let's unpack this. How does someone go from being nauseated by the smell of paint to creating some of the most celebrated art in American history?
Well, she needed a radical shift in perspective, a way to basically break out of the artistic cage she'd been put in.
Okay, what kind of cage?
Up until this point, O'Keeffe's academic training had been entirely based on the mimetic tradition, which essentially means her teachers were instructing her to act like a human photocopier.
Oh, just copying exactly what's in front of her.
Exactly. Copying nature, plaster casts, and models as realistically and literally as possible. It was entirely rigid.
Which would feel incredibly stifling for someone who wants to express an internal feeling, Not just document what a bowl of fruit looks like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the breakthrough comes during a summer art class in 1912. She was introduced to the ideas of an art educator named Arthur Wesley Dow.
Oh, Dow. He's huge in her story.
Massive. Dow's philosophy was entirely different from the European academic tradition. He was deeply influenced by Japanese art principles,
Right.
specifically this concept of noten, which focuses on the harmonious balance of light and dark and the arrangement of shapes.
Okay, so less about copying, more about balance.
Yeah, Tao taught that art wasn't about copying nature at all. It was about filling a space in a beautiful way, using line, color, and composition.
So Dow's method essentially gave O'Keeffe permission to stop looking outward at plaster casts and start looking inward. It allowed her to draw her own private sensations.
Yes. And that internal shift culminated in late 1915. O'Keeffe essentially locked herself away and made this deliberate, severe choice.
What did she do?
She realized that everything she had painted up to that point belonged to her past teachers. To find her own voice, she stripped away everything, even color.
Wow.
Using nothing but raw charcoal on paper, she created a series of highly innovative abstract drawings. She was capturing the essence of her personal feelings through stark lines and dark shading.
And then she sends these, right?
Yeah, she mailed these charcoal abstractions to a former classmate, Anita Politzer.
Right. And Pulitzer is so struck by these drawings that she takes them straight to the famous 291 Gallery in New York City.
Which was a massive deal.
Huge, because this gallery is run by Alfred Stieglitz, who is this incredibly influential, powerful art dealer and photographer.
The gatekeeper of modern art back then.
Exactly. And Stieglitz takes one look at these charcoals and declares them the purest, finest, sincerest things that had entered his gallery in a long while.
I love that quote.
He exhibits them in 1916. And just like that, the trajectory of her life shoots straight into the stratosphere.
It really did. That fateful charcoal submission didn't just give her a career. It pulled her into a whirlwind professional and romantic relationship with Stieglitz that permanently altered the course of her life.
For better and for worse.
Right. In 1918, Stieglitz offered to financially support her for a year so she could move to New York and dedicate herself entirely to painting. They eventually married in 1924.
Right.
And like you said, Stieglitz was an absolute titan of the avant-garde art world. He used his massive influence to promote her work. But the specific method he used to promote her had lasting, incredibly complicated consequences.
Because he didn't just promote her canvases, he promoted her.
Exactly.
Stieglitz was a master photographer, and he became utterly obsessed with documenting O'Keeffe. The source material notes he took more than 350 portraits of her over the years.
It's a huge archive.
And crucially, more than 200 of those were highly intimate nude photographs.
Yeah, and you have to think about the context. In the early 1920s, exhibiting hundreds of nude photographs of your wife, who's also an emerging artist you represent, caused a massive public sensation.
I mean, even today that would cause a stir.
Oh, absolutely. It created a monumental spectacle. Stieglitz was presenting her to the public not just as a painter, but as a muse, framing her through a highly sensual, intimate lens.
So wait, the contrast between this scandalous public persona and what she was actually doing in her studio is just wild.
It's completely at odds.
Right. She's living in a 30th floor apartment at the Shelton Hotel in Manhattan. She is looking out the window and painting these magnificent, highly structured skyscraper paintings.
The cityscapes are amazing.
Works like Radiator Building Night, New York from 1927. She was working in a style akin to precisionism. Instead of painting a blurry, romanticized city, she painted modern industrial skyscrapers with sharp, clean lines and stark geometry.
Treating a commercial radiator building with the same reverence past artists used for cathedrals. And she was also beginning to paint her massive magnified flowers during this same period, like the famous Red Canna series.
The ones everyone knows her for now.
Right. She was taking a tiny, delicate object and blowing it up so large it demanded your full attention.
It's like putting a megaphone to a whisper. By blowing up a 2-inch blossom to fill a 4-foot canvas, she essentially forced busy, distracted New Yorkers to actually stop and look at something they would normally just step right over.
That's a great analogy.
But didn't Stieglitz's viral nude photos of her totally overshadow her actual art at first? It sounds like the 1920s equivalent of going viral for a scandal instead of your talent.
What's fascinating here is that the publicity functioned as an immense double-edged sword. On one hand, Stieglitz's relentless promotion made her a household name.
Right, it worked.
It worked incredibly well. He even masterminded a brilliant PR coup in 1928, announcing to the press that 6 of her calla lily paintings had sold to an anonymous French buyer for $25,000.
Which was an unheard of sum at the time.
Unimaginable.
Even though And the sources note this. There is no concrete evidence the transaction actually happened exactly the way he reported it.
Exactly. It might have been mostly PR. But the press eagerly printed the story regardless, and it permanently skyrocketed the prices of her paintings.
But you mentioned a double-edged sword.
Right, the other edge of that sword was much sharper. Stieglitz permanently attached his own gaze to her identity. Because the public first met O'Keeffe through those nude photographs, they inadvertently created a permanent, highly sexualized lens through which the art world would view her paintings for decades.
That intense public spotlight leads us directly into what we could call the battle over meaning. The art world began projecting their own deeply held beliefs, biases, and cultural agendas right onto her canvases.
Oh, the interpretations documented in the historical record are incredibly polarized. We really have to remain impartial here and just look at the sources because people had very strong opinions.
Right, what were people saying?
Well, in the 1920s, you had male critics like Samuel Coutts looking at her work. Coutts argued that the assertion of sex he perceived in her work was actually artistically problematic.
Wait, problematic how?
He stated that it impeded an artist's talent because it was an act of defiance that retarded the natural assertions of the painter.
Wow. A critic literally claiming that because he perceived her art as asserting her sexuality, it made her a lesser artist.
That was his stance. But on the flip side, you have someone like Paul Rosenfeld, a journalist in 1922.
What did he say?
He wrote that the essence of very womanhood permeated her pictures, arguing that her use of color and abstract shapes were direct metaphors for the female body.
Okay, so two totally different extremes in the 20s.
And this phenomenon didn't fade with the 1920s either. Decades later, a completely different generation claimed her work for their own movement.
The 70s, right?
Yeah, in the 1970s, feminist historians and artists looked at those exact same canvases and championed them as political statements.
Oh, interesting.
Wyndon Nauckland, a highly influential feminist art historian, interpreted paintings like Black Iris III as a visual stand-in for female anatomy.
Right.
And the artist Judy Chicago gave O'Keeffe a prominent place in her famous feminist installation, The Dinner Party, specifically celebrating O'Keeffe's flower paintings as groundbreaking, revolutionary vulvar imagery.
Okay, so let's recap this. You have the male critics of the 20s saying it's overtly sexual and therefore bad. You have journalists saying it's the pure essence of womanhood. And you have feminists in the 70s saying it's brilliant female iconography.
Exactly.
But the kicker here is O'Keeffe's reaction to all of this, because she furiously rejected every single one of those interpretations.
Oh, she hated it.
For 50 years, she maintained there was absolutely no connection between anatomy and her artwork. She was incredibly blunt about it. She said, "When people read erotic symbols into my paintings, they're really talking about their own affairs."
She attributed all of those critical attacks and interpretations to psychological projection. O'Keeffe vehemently disliked being labeled a woman artist.
She just wanted to be an artist.
Right. She demanded to simply be seen as an artist. She explicitly stated that femaleness is irrelevant to the act of art making or accomplishment.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I mean, why do we constantly try to force artists, or really anyone in the public eye, into neat little boxes?
Well, I think it points to the universal human tendency to interpret others' actions through our own psychological projections. The critics in the 20s saw her through the lens of Freudian psychoanalysis and the scandal of Stieglitz's photography.
Right.
And the feminist movement of the 70s saw her through the lens of women's liberation. But maintaining your own identity amidst that constant, deafening public noise takes an immense amount of energy.
I can't even imagine.
O'Keeffe's absolute refusal to accept any of the labels handed to her is a profound act of boundary setting. But fighting that battle constantly really takes a toll.
It sounds utterly exhausting. And to escape those suffocating projections and her bouts of severe depression and her husband's painful long-term affair with a woman named Dorothy Norman, O'Keeffe realized she needed a landscape as vast as her ambition.
She needed out.
She literally had to drive away.
Yeah. In 1929, at the suggestion of friends, she traveled by train to Taos, New Mexico, to spend the summer painting. And it was a complete revelation.
She finally found her place. She called it the Faraway.
The Faraway.
And she wasn't just going to sit on a porch and passively look at the desert either. She bought a Ford Model A and learned to drive specifically so she could explore the harsh terrain entirely alone.
That is so badass.
This is the ultimate solo road trip for your mental health. She just hops in a Ford and claims the desert for herself.
She really did.
Yeah.
She painted a flat-topped mountain called Cerro Pedernal, So often she claimed ownership of it. She actually said, "It's my private mountain. It belongs to me. God told me if I painted it enough, I could have it."
I love that level of confidence.
Right. Her immersion in the American Southwest deeply changed her artistic focus. She started collecting bleached animal bones and rocks from the desert floor. This is when we see the shift to her iconic skull motifs.
Oh, like summer days.
Yes. Consider her 1936 painting Summer Days, where this stark white deer's skull hovers majestically in the sky above vibrant desert wildflowers.
She was exploring these incredible, desolate geological formations. She found an area she called the Black Place, which she beautifully described as a mile of elephants with gray hills and white sand at their feet,
What a description.
and another area of towering white cliffs she called the White Place. She eventually bought a house on the Ghost Ranch property and later an abandoned hacienda in the village of Abiquio that she spent years meticulously renovating into a sparse adobe home and studio.
And by transforming her environment, she transformed her lifestyle and her narrative. The sources note that in New Mexico, she broke free of strict gender roles. She adopted practical, gender-neutral clothing. She found what was described as psychological space and sexual freedom out there, thousands of miles away from the rigid expectations of the New York art scene.
She just reclaimed her life.
Exactly. By controlling her physical environment so absolutely, she reclaimed complete control of her artistic output. She was no longer Stieglitz's muse confined to a skyscraper. She was a severe, fiercely independent force of nature in the desert.
But even isolated in the desert, O'Keeffe remained a working, evolving artist who had to navigate commercial demands. And there's this amazing, rather funny anecdote from 1939 that perfectly captures her stubbornness.
Oh, the pineapple story.
Yes. An advertising agency hires her to travel to Hawaii to create 2 paintings for the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, which we now know as Dole.
It was just a standard commercial commission. They were paying her out to paint a pineapple for their marketing materials.
So she goes to Hawaii for 9 weeks and absolutely loves it. She paints 20 beautiful, sensual landscapes, tropical flowers, traditional fish hooks.
But no pineapple.
She completely stubbornly refuses to paint the requested pineapple. She just wouldn't do it. Not until the company literally shipped a live pineapple plant directly to her studio in New York.
That is hilarious.
Only then, on her own turf, did she finally paint it.
She refused to compromise her process for anyone's timeline. She had to paint it on her terms, in her own space.
Exactly.
But, as she aged, she faced a challenge that stubbornness alone couldn't fix. And eventually her own body betrayed her. In the 1970s, she developed macular degeneration.
That meant she lost much of her eyesight, leaving her with only peripheral vision. It creates this massive blind spot right in the center of the world she is trying to observe.
It's heartbreaking.
By 1972, she had to stop oil painting entirely without assistance.
For an artist whose entire life was predicated on intense visual observation, on magnifying the intricate details of the world so others could see its true meaning, losing her central vision could easily have been the end of her career.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Losing her sight didn't stop her. It just forced her to change her medium. It reveals this compulsive, unstoppable need to create.
Yeah, she wouldn't let it stop her.
In 1973, she hires a live-in assistant, a young potter named Juan Hamilton, and Hamilton teaches this legendary painter how to work with clay.
This is where we see the translation of visual mastery into tactile mastery. She couldn't see the fine details of a canvas anymore, but her brain still understood form, volume, and space.
So she just feels her way through it.
Yeah, she adapted. She began sculpting. Hamilton also encouraged her to resume painting despite her failing eyesight, and he helped her write her autobiography, which became a bestseller in 1976.
That's incredible.
And get this, she even continued making art unassisted, using charcoal, all the way until 1984. The very same medium she had used to launch her career back in her locker room in 1915.
Wait, really? She was in her late 90s still creating?
It proves that true mastery isn't tied to a single physical tool. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's not about the paintbrush or the specific oil paints or even having perfect eyesight.
Right.
True mastery resides in the perspective of the creator. The medium changed from two-dimensional oil to three-dimensional clay, but the vision remained undeniably O'Keeffe.
Georgia O'Keeffe died in 1986 at the age of 98. and her ashes were scattered over the harsh, beautiful landscape of her beloved ghost ranch.
A fitting end.
Yeah. And when we look back at the entirety of the source material, it's clear she wasn't just a painter of magnified flowers or desert skulls. She was a master of constant, deliberate reinvention.
Definitely.
She moved from rigid academic training to highly abstract charcoals. She transitioned from the geometric skyscrapers of New York to the stark, sun-bleached beauty of New Mexico. And finally, when her eyes failed her, she moved her genius from canvas to clay.
Her life serves as a profound reminder to anyone listening. You live in a world of constant information overload, where everyone has an immediate opinion on who you are, what you mean, and what you should be doing.
Everyone wants to put you in a box.
Right. And O'Keefe shows us that protecting your own mental space, refusing the labels that others try to force upon you, and defining your own narrative is not just some stubborn quirk. It is a radical, necessary act for survival.
I want to leave you with a final thought, drawn directly from O'Keeffe's own writings. In 1978, she was looking back at those famous, scandalous photographs that Alfred Stieglitz had taken of her decades earlier, the very photos that had so heavily influenced how the world perceived her.
The ones that started all the projections.
Exactly. And looking at those captured moments of her past self, frozen in black and white, she wrote, "I wonder who that person is. It is as if in my one life I have lived many lives."
It is a beautiful, haunting reflection on the passage of time.
So I invite you to ponder this as you go about your day. How many lives have you already lived? And when you look back at the past versions of yourself, who gets to decide which one was the real you? The world or you?